Lucy!
Arthur, dear brother.
Lucy!
Arthur, why didn't you come sooner? Come, let me kiss you.
Well, that bites. Hi, I'm Bobby, and it's Halloween time, so I thought I'd take a look at a horror classic from the famed Hammer Studios. And, being completely impartial, I thought I'd go with Horror of Dracula. Or if you're in the UK, just Dracula. So let's take our first bite into Hammer Horror. Bram Stoker's novel, Dracula, had become a horror icon, largely due to the 1927 Broadway play and the 1931 film, which was produced by Universal Studios and starred Bela Lugosi. But by the late 50s, Bela Lugosi had died and the film was over 25 years old, so the time had come for a new man to don the cape. In England, Hammer Studios had been around since 1934, producing all sorts of films. But with the UK and US success of the Quartermass Experiment, which was a science fiction film with definite horror overtones, they began looking at horror. First they did The Curse of Frankenstein, and unlike the original, it was done in color, and it had the big three: sex, violence, and gore. At least for 1957 standards. The Frankenstein remake was a hit, so it only made sense to remake Dracula. Several of the Frankenstein cast and crew members returned, including Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee, and once again, they would be filming at Bray Studios. Previously, Universal tried to stop Hammer from making Frankenstein, and there could be no similarities between the Hammer film and the Universal film. For Dracula, the same rules applied. And they could not use the Bela Lugosi film or the play. Only the book, which was already in public domain, could be used for inspiration. But the challenge was to turn the huge novel of Dracula into a low-budget Hammer production. Jonathan Harker is going to Dracula's castle, and under the pretext of being his librarian, plans to destroy the Prince of Evil. But, just like in real life, the plans fall through, and Dracula kills him. Jonathan's friend, Professor Van Helsing, goes to Transylvania and discovers Jonathan's diary, and he discovers Jonathan, but no Count Dracula. Van Helsing then goes to Jonathan's family to inform them of his death. There's his future brother-in-law, Arthur Homewood, his wife Mina, and Jonathan's sickly fiancée, Lucy. When Van Helsing discovers that Lucy is also under Dracula's spell, he enlists Arthur's help, and the two men try to stop the Horror of Dracula! Horror of Dracula had the task of transforming the enormous novel of Dracula into an hour and 22-minute movie, and with a low Hammer budget. So just like the Bela Lugosi version, they had to condense it, but in a completely different way. Just like in the novel, Jonathan Harker is traveling to Dracula's castle, and he chronicles these events in his journal, so we know exactly what he's thinking. But in trying to move the story along, they change it so that Jonathan is actually on a secret mission to kill Count Dracula. The opening scenes in Transylvania are usually the spookiest part of every Dracula movie, but this makes them even better by invigorating it with a whole new level of suspense. Because instead of just waiting for Dracula to get him, you're waiting for who's gonna get who first. And it turns the often bland character of Jonathan Harker, Dracula, into a fascinating character. As for the middle section, just like in the book, it focuses more on the human characters, with Dracula only making a few sporadic appearances. Having a character that's not physically there, but you always feel his presence, I think works better in the book, where you have more time to build that atmosphere. Whereas in the movie, sometimes it's like, where'd he go? And it does create for a couple slow spots, because you don't always feel that threat. As for the ending, it's condensed too naturally, but in a great way.
In the book, Dracula starts in Transylvania, and the main characters are in England. And they have this elaborate race over several days of trying to chase Dracula back to his castle using boats and trains. In the movie, they change the main character setting to Karlstadt, Germany, and move Dracula's castle to near Klausenburg, Transylvania, which makes them geographically close enough so that as soon as Van Helsing discovers Dracula, Dracula flees, Van Helsing chases him by coach, and they get to the castle that very night, just as the sun is coming up for their final showdown.
Madam told me on no account must I go in the cellar.
Homeward! Homeward!
So you get the book's return to Transylvania, but with more excitement because it happens so fast. These changes make Horror of Dracula stand out from every other Dracula movie, and so do the actors. Christopher Lee is one of the most iconic Draculas ever. Now, as you could probably tell, he's not really my favorite. My favorite would be Lugosi. But like Lugosi, he has this aristocratic and sexual aura to his performance. But then he takes the role in a completely new direction.
And you could tell from his very first scene.
Lugosi has this quiet entrance that slowly engulfs you into the weird atmosphere.
I am Dracula.
But when you first see Lee, you're startled by him, and by the Dracula theme music, dun dun dun, which is actually saying the words, Dracula, dun dun dun.
I'm Dracula. I welcome you to my house. It catches you off guard by how fast he is. Lugosi was the threat of violence. Christopher Lee is the violence itself.
He has sharp fangs and red eyes. And by the way, these contacts not only hurt, they also made it impossible to see, making him as blind as a bat. He's always running, jumping, throwing people, and embracing his victims. This Dracula doesn't turn into a bat or wolf. He's a wild, predatory animal on his own. Unfortunately, they don't give him enough to do. This becomes a bigger problem in the sequels, but even in this one, he only has 7 minutes of screen time. The real star of the movie is Peter Cushing as the vampire expert and hunter, Professor Van Helsing.
Please try and understand. This isn't Lucy, the sister you love. It's only her shell, possessed and corrupted by the evil of Dracula. To liberate her soul and give her peace at last, we must destroy this shell for all time. Believe me, there is no other way. Just like with Christopher Lee, this became Peter Cushing's signature role, and he absolutely is my favorite Professor Van Helsing. He has this maturity, wisdom, and seriousness, so you believe everything he says, no matter how batty it sounds. But he's also a physical dynamo. When he hears new information, his eyes light up, and he bursts into action. He's running, he's fighting, and when he jumps over the banister, Peter Cushing insisted on doing that himself and not using a stuntman. So him and Christopher Lee are perfectly matched as hero and villain. They also try to incorporate some of the characteristics of the Professor Van Helsing in the book by giving him a few moments of warmth and even a couple funny moments.
You rang, sir?
Yes, I want this letter delivered immediately. What's the matter?
Well, sir, I thought I heard you talking to someone.
Of course you did. I was talking to myself. Although they were often cast as rivals, the two actors became the best of friends and became icons of Hammer horror, along with the cast. Other trademark touches of Hammer horror influenced the look and feel of the film.
Unlike the Universal films, the vampires have fangs, and for the time, there were violent staking scenes, although not so much by today's standards. However, because doing Dracula in color was part of the novelty, they make great use of that color. They have this bright red blood that just catches your eye. I like the sets too, especially Dracula's castle. It's not as grand as the Lugosi one. Instead, it's more like a maze, with countless weirdly decorated rooms that have so much personality.
It's a combination of everything that a kid, or the kid in all of us, would want in a horror movie, with the more mature ideas and elements of traditional Gothic horror. It's an atmosphere that's impossible for any other studio to duplicate, and I think impossible to resist.
In England, it was titled Dracula, but to avoid confusion with the Lugosi film, in the US it was called Horror of Dracula. Either way, it was a huge hit. It launched a whole Dracula franchise, and helped turn Hammer Studios into an icon of horror. When the film was released, the BBFC demanded several cuts. This footage was missing for decades, but in 2011, Hammer fan Simon Rawson found the missing footage in a Japanese print, and Hammer Studios restored this footage for the 2013 Blu-ray release.
It's not the book, and it's not perfect, but it's a darn good Dracula movie, and because they're not religiously following the source material, they do some really creative things with it, and in certain aspects actually improve upon it. So I give it 3 blood banks out of 4. Thank you for watching Dusty Old Movies, and have a fantastic Halloween.